All right, so it's August the 10th. We're now 2 days removed from the August 8th FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago. And as we think about this, we've had time to let it mull and kind of fester in the mind. I've started to consider what things will look like moving forward. And the fact is that this is not a problem that is limited to Donald Trump. Yes, Donald Trump has a way of making them especially crazy. I do think that there is a lot of people within the American elite and the administrative state who are prone to madness when they are faced with the problem of Donald Trump. But I think these people, once they've snapped, once he has broken them, I don't think that you then put a more normal personality in front of them. I don't think that they go back to being normal people. I think that they will stay broken. And the extraordinary measures which they have utilized in their effort to thwart the Orange Man, those tools are not going back in the toolbox. Just like the Federal Reserve can never normalize interest rates, I think that the FBI is never going to be able to normalize their policy towards anti-establishment political candidates. As they escalate their efforts to thwart the Orange Man, to try and tie him up in legal knots, or even jail him in order to prevent him from running for a second term as president, they inevitably radicalize his supporters against them. And so they're, in effect, turbocharging anti-deep state politics. I even heard Ron Johnson, a 2010 Tea Party guy, not some, big right-wing radical or anything like that, go so far as to say that it is time, for something akin to the Church Committee to once again be brought about, in Congress. And what he means by that is that people need to investigate the intelligence community and expose what sort of unsavory, illegal, and generally naughty things they're up to. Now, that's not quite going as far as saying that we need to abolish the FBI, but inevitably, just like with the First Church Committee or anything like that, the more light is shown on these agencies, the more attention they get of this nature, the more critical attention they get, the closer we get to that, the more people will support that. There aren't people who, once learning all the deepest, darkest secrets of the FBI or the CIA, will think that will be more likely to think those agencies should exist. They'll be more likely to think these agencies shouldn't exist. And so the FBI is walking a precarious path. I don't think that this is going to play out well for them in the medium to long term. And so what can they do to try and combat that? Well, I think that they're going to have to double down. I think that they're going to have to get worse, and they're going to have to continually resort to these tactics. And so what this means is that we will never have a normal election again in America. That's what it amounts to. Because any election where the FBI is trying to interfere and trump up charges, no pun intended, to hamper or even cripple the campaign of one party, that is not a normal election. Those are not free and fair elections. Those are elections where the state is trying to stack the deck against one side. And, let alone any extraneous election fortification, akin to what we saw in 2020. I'm looking purely at the actions of the DOJ, the FBI, and even in Trump's case now, the New York Attorney General, trying to pursue entirely separate charges. If they're willing to do it to Donald Trump, a former president of the United States, then they certainly would be willing to do much worse to ordinary Americans, and they at least would be willing to do as much if not more, to, whoever comes after Donald Trump, whether that be, DeSantis or somebody else. It's not like, if they just get rid of Trump, they'll be satisfied. No. I mean, they thought that Mitt Romney was Hitler back in 2012. Well, the next time around, they didn't have Romney. They got rid of Romney. Romney was out. He wasn't elected to anything. And yet, when Trump came around in 2016, they thought Trump was even worse than Hitler. And so whoever comes after Trump, whoever the next nominee is from the Republican Party, they again will think is even worse, particularly if that, nominee is not someone of the Jeb Bush ilk and is rather, more in the Donald Trump mold. And so that's why I say we can never have another normal, fair election. Once it's done once, it becomes very easy to do it again. And then the next hurdle they have to clear is just doing something more extreme. Once you escalate, you don't really take steps down that escalator. You take steps up. And that's what they've done here. And even if they stay at this level and they do no further escalations, if they just, well, you know what, no. Because the further escalation, I think, will be filing criminal charges, which I think is probable at this point. At some point, they're going to try and charge Trump with something, even if they have to plant evidence, as Trump suggested. Apparently, they told the staff at Mar-a-Lago, oh, you can't have any security cameras on. You can't have anybody looking at us. We're just going to go through Melania's underwear drawer and conduct a panty raid. If nobody's watching them, well, then it would be very easy for them to just, plant some cocaine or something and say, aha, Melania's a cokehead. And then they could charge the Trumps with, possession of cocaine, put them away for, a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years or something. Now, if we really do get to that stage, which again, we pretty much are already there, but I guess it hasn't entirely set in yet. That's what really matters. If people feel that, if people feel like we're a banana republic. Perception is reality as far as that's concerned, as far as politics is concerned. Once the voters recognize that elections don't matter, that our elections are fake or pointless, once that sort of apathy sets in, the federal state will completely lose legitimacy, which again is something that I applaud. I want that to happen because I don't think that the federal government does anything good for anybody. And so I'm happy to witness these unforced errors and see them harm themselves and their own credibility, because that will build anti-federal sentiment and ultimately sets the stage for nullification, interposition, and finally secession. The United States has very strong state governments that could function in the absence of a federal government. We don't need the federal government. If the federal government collapses, our society will not collapse. We will be able to continue to go on living, as we did before. And so, people who say that, oh my gosh, you don't want the government to collapse because, then we'll end up like, Weimar Germany or something, or what's a better example? Somalia, which actually was better during its period of anarchy than it's been since the U.S. has tried to, reimpose a democracy. Believe it or not, Somalia is much more violent when you have Reaper drones prowling the skies and targeting the small children with missiles. But even still, our situation would be completely different. If the federal government collapses under its own weight, we still have our states. You would still have schools. You would still have police. You would still have the fire department. All these things about government that, the average person may or may not like, they would still exist. And so, as the federal government continues to alienate the right half of America, what can they do? What does that collapse look like? What does resistance look like? Well, the first thing would be interposition. The states defending its citizens from federal tyranny, from federal overreach, evicting the FBI, the IRS, these various agencies, kicking them out of their state, making it clear that they do not have any authority there, these sorts of things. Now, we're not there yet, but support is going to continue to build for that sort of action, and eventually someone will take it. Because if the right half of America comes to believe that every presidential election will be rigged against them through whatever various machinations of the administrative state, well, then the right half of America will not care about their authority. And so they will support their local and state governments, completely disregarding their authority. And so this is what we have to look forward to in the next few years if the forces of the federal establishment continue this escalation that they've been engaged in ever since old Trumpy Bear came on the scene. And so in the short term, I think that this will be very painful. It will be unhappy. It will be discouraging. But I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's that they have overstepped their authority. They have already eroded significantly and rapidly their own legitimacy. The right half of America, remember, used to be the more pro-FBI, more pro-CIA, more pro-cop, much more so than the left. And while the right is still generally supportive of local police, they have done a complete 180 on federal agents of all kinds, of all stripes. And that's remarkable. Their number one, highest favored demographic has flipped on them. And they have the power to take down the entire federal government with them. And I think that they intend to. Of course, they don't know that that's what they're doing. But their actions that they intend on carrying out will result in that ultimately. And I don't think they care what ordinary people think. I don't think they have any idea about, popular sovereignty, or popular legitimacy. They don't think it matters. They think that whatever Washington spouts is, the law of the land, and that the consent of the governed, doesn't matter in a real practical sense. They think that those are just rhetorical flourishes, from the founding fathers, old dinosaurs who should be forgotten. But the concept of the consent of the governed is very real, because if you lack that, if people don't choose to go along with what the government says en masse, you cannot control society. It doesn't even take a majority of people. You don't have to get the entirety, of the right half of America to reject these people. You could just take a substantial minority of the country to reject federal authority, and it would no longer exist. It would become, their edicts would become unenforceable at every level. And I think at this point, if they martyr Trump in 2024, and they successfully block him, so that he is unable to take office, whether he would have lost anyway or not is immaterial. If there's crap like this hanging over the election, obviously his supporters will blame the interference of the deep state for his loss. And even more people than who rejected the results of the 2020 election will retroactively go back and say, hey, you know what? 2024 was effed up. I bet 2020 was too. And so I think at that point, the right half of America will reject the legitimacy of the federal government. They will see it as a dictatorship. And that's when the pressure will finally, I think, reach a critical mass at the state and local level, as long as we still have people like DeSantis around, who are able to read the tea leaves, and check the wind of the base, to start pushing back. Now, by that point, by 2024, by the time that's over, DeSantis will only have 2 years left, by that, we're going to need other governors by then who are on his level and are willing to take the initiative. Kari Lake hopefully will be one of them. Maybe there are people who, I don't know yet who could take that position. Certainly, in 2018, I did not expect DeSantis to end up being the person that he was. Frankly, I don't think DeSantis didn't stand out to me much at all until 2020, mid-2020. Even living here, he was, his first couple years, before the Wu flu thing, he was not a divisive governor. Despite what people may say now, the left was not particularly energized against him. He was generally regarded as competent. That was, I think, how most people would describe him, if they had any opinion of him at all. But they were not super passionate, against him. Certainly, he hadn't done anything to offend or really, energize any of us. But since 2020. He has taken the initiative to try and push this state in a rightward direction, and people have really resonated with that. It's what they used to call leadership, and we need more of it. The Greg Abbotts of the world are not going to cut it, and we need those people in place. At least I think we need a few of them for 2024 and the post-2024 world. And then if you have a collective of governors who are willing to push back, they then will be able to drag other red state governors along with them. But like I said, DeSantis will only have a couple years left at that point, which a couple years is a long time, but we'll need to make sure that he has a good successor by then. I think Sabatini would be great. Matt Gaetz, they just want to hang this statutory rape scandal over his head. They've never announced that, there was that announcement that, there's some kind of investigation going on to him, and then we've got nothing since. So they're just going to kind of, I think, leave that one on the back burner until it's more useful for him, because right now he's only a congressman. But, by having this hanging over his head, he can't really run for higher office, because then they'll just pull it out and go like, hey, aren't you under investigation for statutory rape? And so personally, if I had to guess, it's probably not true. I think that they probably just want something to hang over him, because he is certainly when DeSantis was running, I mean, he was not the lieutenant governor candidate, but that's how he came across during the campaign. He was at a lot of stops with DeSantis, and he was like he was his number two campaigner. He was very much DeSantis Jr., old Matt Gaetz. And so I'm going to assume that they'll probably, well, who knows? I mean, 4 years from now, that's a long time. But even if he's, out of commission, there are other people. Unfortunately, Sabatini, who I think would be the best candidate, is just absolutely hated by the Republican establishment. I don't think even DeSantis will talk to him. I've never really understood why, but Sabatini is one of those, I think it's Marjorie Taylor Greene who has no committee assignments in Congress. Sabatini in the Florida House has no committee assignments. And this year, Sabatini is running for Congress. We'll see on August 23rd if he wins this primary. I don't know how competitive his primary is, but if he does win, that is a red district, and he will become a U.S. congressman. So hopefully then he'll be able to build a bigger profile for himself. DeSantis was a congressman when he ran for governor. Other than those two, I can't really tell you anybody that I would really trust at this point who is already around. But you know what? Maybe by then there will be good governors in other states, and Florida won't have to lead the way as much. Maybe, if we have a mediocre governor, they'll just have to serve as a junior partner, but still go along with what the other good governors in the country are doing. But at this point, back in 2016, I remember thinking, the accelerationist in me thought, Hillary was so unpopular, if she wins, this will just accelerate the decline. It will, she's so incompetent, everyone hates her, that will really poison people against the idea of the federal government. Then Trump came in, and he was able to expose so much more of what was wrong with these people than I think even Hillary could have. And it turned out Trump winning, was for the best. So at this point, I would still hope that in 2024, Trump is successful in winning. But if he doesn't win, I do think that that is still useful in and of itself. Because in a way, we did see this effect in 2016 to a great extent. People thought, hey, once Trump won, they became complacent. They said, okay, the system's working. We voted, we got the guy we wanted, and now all of a sudden we don't have as big of a problem with the federal government, which they did when Obama was president. That regressed a bit. But then the federal government treated Trump so terribly and refused to be governed that by the end of Trump's presidency, that was no longer the case. So we'll see maybe if Trump 2.0, if that works out differently. The best case scenario probably would be Trump getting elected, being sworn in, and then being removed from office. That would, I think, just set people on fire. And I don't say this because I want people to be angry. I just want people to recognize reality. I don't want to turn people against the federal government because I'm trying to poison their mind. I genuinely believe that this institution is beyond saving. I didn't used to think that way. I used to think, hey, if we just vote in the right people, everything's going to be okay. But then I realized that structurally that is just not feasible. Elected officials only have so much power in our federal government. The vast majority of power rests with people in the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, the NSA, all of these three-letter agencies. Those are the folks who wield real power in the federal government. The ATF are the ones who decide what gun laws are. What Congress passes doesn't matter. What the ATF internally decides, the law is. That's what matters. So, in closing, conservatives have come so far in the past couple of years, so much further than I would have ever expected. I can only imagine how far they'll come in the next couple of years, and then the couple of years after that. So I think our politics are moving in the right direction. As I've said since I started this channel, everything in America has to get worse before it gets better. And so that's why, to me, as the saying on Wall Street goes, bad news is good news. In Wall Street's case, it's because, bad economic news means that the Fed either will be less likely to hike rates, they'll hike rates by less, or they will actually cut rates. That's why bad news is good news on Wall Street. Bad news is good news in American politics because it delegitimizes our very corrupt and completely irredeemable institutions. Oh, and did I mention, we have our whole economic crisis, which is in the process of unfolding. That will do a different kind of damage, financial damage to the regime. I've become less confident in because it just seems like, damn, no matter what happens, they just can keep printing money and spending it, and deficits don't matter. And what happens to the economy? Sure, we can just shut down the economy for a year and close the gap in GDP by printing money, and everything's fine. Sure, we create a lot of inflation, but hey, inflation's down from 9.1 to 8.5%, so all our problems are solved, right? With that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.